So William, if he is new to you, and I know many of you, he will not be new to you, but he has been involved with holistic spirituality and health for a very long time, very involved with Findhorn and setting up alternatives in London, which has put on many wonderful presentations over the years, and indeed is very involved with the Spiritual Companions Network, which has certainly been very strong around here. So he is very, very rooted in all of this stuff, and he has had his own experiences with the beyond, perhaps, and we're going to hear about this evening, and hopefully try to get a handle on not only how do we deal with our lives, but how do we deal with planning for what goes beyond that. And that is something that I think we don't think about enough. But today, we will. So it's a really great pleasure to welcome back William Bloom. Thank you very much.
All right, good evening. My voice okay at the back? Yeah, good. Can we take 30 seconds quiet just to bring ourselves into the room? Would that be okay? Just 30 seconds mindful silence. Thank you. So first of all, thank you to all the organisers, especially the angel Di for getting me here. And I have some pictures which I'm going to show. Can you see them? This one okay from the back? Just, okay, good. I was glad to get the invitation to come and talk. And I was particularly glad that the gateway was to do with death, because I've been working on a presentation about death for a long time. And I want to start off by saying that I'm aware that it's a sensitive subject, because in this group tonight, in this audience, we don't know who may be experiencing grief because of someone who's just departed or about to depart. There may be some of us who are older, like me, who are looking at death coming towards us, and there may be some anxiety and fear there, in actual fact, and it's very normal for that unknown to invite a frisson of fear sometimes. But I'm very cheerful about death. I'm very cheerful about death because of my own experiences that happened in my 20s. And since then, I've explored it in meditation almost every day. So the flow of the presentation is I'll share with you my own experiences. I'll share with you what I think they mean. And I'll share with you a map that I kind of buy, 99%, of what happens when we die, after we die, and beyond. I need to say to you immediately that I will present this with a certain aura of certainty. Yes, this is my opinion. And at the same time, I've got 2 or 3 brain cells that are going, keep your bullshit scanner switched on. This may not be true. This may not be real. This may just be delusion. This may just be you making it up because it's comfortable. And I've delivered dozens of workshops on the transfer of consciousness. And I remember in one of them, there was a guy in the back row whose wife had dragged him along, and he was a doctor, surgeon. And he came up to me at the end and he said, look, I was very glad when you said at the very beginning of the workshop that you had a couple of brain cells that were skeptical about the whole thing. He said, because I came in 100% skeptical. And now at the end of the day, I've got a couple of brain cells going, yeah, well, maybe this is true. When I was 25, I had a career in London book publishing and novel writing. I had novels published, had been a commissioning editor, and it was meaningless to me. And at the same time, I had a history in psychedelics and Western mystery tradition. And by the time I hit 24, 25, I was going, this life in London, this media life, this is meaningless to me. And I chose to take 2 years retreat in the Atlas Mountains of southern Morocco and lived off-grid for a couple of years. And towards the end of that stay in the High Atlas Mountains, I collapsed with hepatitis B. Don't know how I got it, maybe bad milk, because I certainly wasn't doing any drugs or anything. The medics thought I was going to die. The doctor in Marrakesh suggested I come and live with him for my last months, but I didn't. I stayed up in the mountains off-grid. And in hepatitis B, when it gets very bad, you don't have any oxygenated blood. The blood is still flowing, but there's no oxygen in it, so there's hardly anything getting to the brain, and you become immobile. And if somebody said something to me, I would register it, and it would take me about half an hour before I responded, by which time they'd moved on. So I was looking stupid. And in the middle of all that, half dead, for about 2 months, I was blessed with 2 months of out-of-the-body near-death experiences. Those experiences were all more or less the same for me. My body was immobile, I could hardly move, I wasn't capable of human interaction hardly, and I found myself in a classic space of floating in another dimension. It was spacious, it was enjoyable, it was pleasant, and there were definitely senses of beings communicating with me, but I'm not one of those people who tends to clothe all this stuff in pictures. I'm more interested in an intuitive sense of how it feels. And it happened often enough for me that in the middle of it all, I was able to be conscious like in a lucid dream and actually say to myself several times, okay, I'm in this space right now. Is this my brain fabricating a metaphorical illusion that works to soothe me as part of my transition into death? And it's a very clever evolutionary trick that the body and brain are playing on me in order that I'm not frightened as I die. So I was conscious enough inside the experience to be asking that kind of question, because prior to that, I'd done 3 years, twice a week psychoanalysis, reflective practice on oneself. And I had published 3, 4, 5, 6 novels, so I understood narratives and stories. And brackets, later on, I went on and did a doctorate in social psychology because I'm interested in the way that the reflective process works. And as a meditator, I was also early on had bought the idea deep in both Buddhist and Christian meditation that once you've gone into the space of being at ease and at one with everything, that one of the things you can do in that space is be open like a radar dish to inquiry, exploration and inquiry, just open and receiving information, yet at the same time you've got your mind switched on. You've got your bullshit scanners switched on, and there's some discernment going on. So in the middle of these regular out-of-the-body, before-death, afterlife experiences, my mind was looking at all this, going, okay, there's the tunnel of light. Here are beings. This feels very nice. Yes, I could see this as a choice between going on and coming back. And I went through that whole process. And because it was 2 months of it, and it was reflective, I came out of that whole journey going, yay to hepatitis B. Wow, fantastic. Because there was this 25-year-old speed freak who'd taken loads of acid and done psychoanalysis and all the rest of it, right? Who'd hit this brick wall, gone splat, had these out-of-the-body experiences, and yet inside them they were long enough and deep enough for me to go, yeah, this is real, this is real. We're still always a couple of brain cells going, yeah, maybe, yeah. And so the first two images I have up here, I don't know if you can see the first one it's a techie, scientific image of the Big Bang. So there was a part of my mind exploring this space as if it were some dimension of the Big Bang. And at the same time, I was going into a space which had more of this kind of a vibe to it. You know, and so I was swinging between the two. There was the resonance of how it felt, and then there was my mind going, what's actually going on here? Tick, 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 tick. And I think for those of us exploring these dimensions, I find it a useful guidance thing. Keep your mind switched on so you can explore and inquire and question. But it also requires a mellow, fluffy vibe, because one of the realities of exploring these dimensions is if you don't soften into some form of goodwill and good humor, you can't actually expand into the next steps. And we'll talk about this a bit later on, especially when we talk about what is a ghost. Because what I'll be saying is a ghost is essentially someone who's died but is in a terribly bad mood. You know, if you're in a terribly bad mood, you're going to make it across. Right? You're not going to go into this kind of state, because this kind, the lion and the lamb state, somebody in a really bad mood is going to look at this as a vibe and go, eh. So one of the things I've been doing since I was 25, 26 is I'm a meditator. That means that every day I sit for an hour at least, maybe longer. And, some of that time is spent soothing myself, getting this mad, highly strung, hysterical neurotic to calm down and just be at ease, right? And as friends used to say about me years ago, can you imagine what he'd be like if he didn't meditate? Answers on a postcard, please. So what's also been happening for me since I was in my mid-20s, I'm in my early 70s now, is that day by day by day, I have genuinely, inside my meditation, gone into that mellow space, gone into Big Bang space, gone, okay, what next? What's it about? What's actually going on? What's actually going on here? What's the model for death? What is actually happening here? And just to share with you for myself, and I won't talk about this, but for myself, my edge at the moment in terms of questioning and discovery is, and I do accept the notion of reincarnation, which I'll explain later on why. But beyond that, what's interesting to me is when the Big Bang sucks everything back in, this stuff, when it sucks everything back in, does consciousness get sucked back in as well? Or does consciousness transcend the Big Bang? Does it transcend black holes which magnetically draw everything back in? Does consciousness envelop them? Is it bigger than it? Somebody in the front row is going, yes! Probably, but it's my main exploration in meditation at the moment. It's interesting and it's engaging for me. But doing the coming back home after the 2 years off grid and all the rest of it, 10 years later, I found myself running these transfer of consciousness workshops and developing some helpful tools for people to explore. And especially in modern holistic culture, there is a general map of what happens at death, which I'm going to share with you. It's a map. The beginning of this presentation is the map of what happens at death, and then we'll explore beyond that. But just to say that I've worked with and shared with people from many different faith traditions and communities, and they all say, yes, this more or less is the map. And it's something like, look, can you see that? That's a corpse lying on its deathbed. Now, what we know is, let's see if I can do this, is the corpse ain't going to float up. That's not on, is it? What we do know is that something else is going to go somewhere. But where? What happens? What happens at that point? So culture by culture, spiritual, religious culture says, yeah, the body stays where it is, but something else floats off. Let's call it the soul. Let's call it consciousness. The language varies from culture to culture, and people will argue about it. And somebody at the end of this talk may say to me, define soul, and I'll go, no. Define spirit. What's the difference between spirit and soul? And there are different visions of what there is afterwards, and those visions of what comes afterwards will depend on the culture. So here's a few of those visions of where we're going. I'm going to Jesus. There was a woman at Findhorn who was dying, and she wanted her journey across to be clean and clear. And she was certain that where she was going was into the arms of Jesus, but Jesus was friends with all the aliens. So on the wall, exactly opposite her bed, there was a picture of the pre-Raphaelite Jesus with the baby animals and everything. And next to him, there was a big flying saucer. So she knew when she lifted off from her body, that's where she was going. Do you like this heavenly place? Is that more your cup of tea? Yes? No? Just curious. I'd love to know, how many in this audience already feel that there is life after death? Can I just have you? Yeah? Cool. Quite a lot of us. Yay. So you might be going there, or you might be going somewhere with no human beings at all. That might be a blessing. So just be lovely animals and plants. That's where my mum wanted to go when she died. She wanted absolutely nothing to do with people ever again. Ever again. This is a well-known one. Yeah. So when I've been teaching or leading the transfer of consciousness workshops, the language I've used, I've borrowed a little bit from Tibetan Buddhism. I've said, well, why don't we just generically call where we're going into the light? And that can mean heaven, paradise, whatever it means to you. But let's just generically say it's into the light. So what's happening at death is the question mark goes, go away, my little... and it goes into the light. That would be the basic model. Somebody dies, they go into the light. But why do we have a sense that that journey may not be a smooth transition? Why do we have a sense that there may be some challenges there? And I want to explain that, which is why people have soul midwives. So look, here's someone in a mood. Is there anybody who's never been in that mood in this room? Yeah? Oh. We have an ecstatic in the front row. You have been there. No, okay, fine. She's owned up, right? So look, basic piece of energy work. Basic, first principles that anybody learns when they're studying esoterics or magic or energy work or shamanism or any of that kind of stuff is energy follows a feeling. Energy follows an emotion. Energy follows a thought. If you have a feeling, you have a thought, it expresses as an energy. Do you buy that? Yeah, okay, fine. In which case, this creature is creating a field of energy around themselves, aren't they? How many people on the planet at the moment? 6 billion, 7 billion, 7 billion people on the planet? All right. So let's look at all the possible moods. All right. So we got depression, victim, anger. Oh, look, there's a couple getting on. Or are they? Are they not? Right? And each one of those events, go away, little pen, or whatever. Look, each one of those events is creating an energy field, isn't it? Yes. All right. So you've got 6-7 billion people creating you've got 8 billion people on this planet creating bad vibes over thousands of years. So when somebody is dying, it's not as simple as, oh, I live on this beautiful planet with this lovely sun and stars and the gorgeous moon, and I'm going to just float off into the white light, because the reality is that planet Earth is actually surrounded by fields of crap energy created by us. Makes sense, doesn't it? Well, it's not good. Luckily, it doesn't go anywhere. It's around this planet. And this is where I was going to say that, a ghost is someone in a very bad mood. It's just stuck inside that energy field. So this creature, this person who's dying, has to somehow or other make their way through that stuff into the clear light. And that's the sense we have of, people may get stuck. And if you talk about bad mood, could also be trauma. So I don't know how many of us in this group do rescue work when there's a catastrophe, like a tsunami or a war, and people are dying innocently in tragedies. There are a whole lot of us who are meditators whose consciousness goes out to those people in order to help guide them across into the clear light. I'm assuming there are people here who do that, yeah? Show me your hands so I'm not alone. Look, there's hands going up, yeah? It's about a dozen hands here, yeah. Great, so I'm not loose. It's just to prove to the rest of the audience that I'm not a loony. But what we've also got to put into the picture is there are helpers on the other side. So many of the, many of the images of heaven, there's someone playing the harp and a lamb and people around, many of the images of heaven include this idea of helpers that are there. So here's a question for you. Do you know how many paid carers there are in the UK? It's an awful lot. There are 1,200,000 paid carers in the United Kingdom. 1,200,000. Do you know how many unpaid carers there are in the UK? Those are children looking after adults, adults looking after adults, seniors looking after folk with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. There's another 6 billion estimated. So if you just take the UK, you've got 1 million paid carers, another 6-7 million unpaid carers. That's 7-8 million people altogether. Of the rest of the population, nearly everybody has a caring instinct when somebody's vulnerable. So one of the ideas that you'll find recurring all the time is that on the other side, there's all of us who have died on the other side that are still in a caring mode. They're still in a caring mode on the other side. So anybody who is dying is going into a space where there are carers. And that does not even begin to include the notion of angels or other kinds of spirit, which some of you may or may not buy or find preposterous, but which occur spiritual tradition by spiritual tradition. So that on the other side, there are all these human beings who are carers, plus other spirits that may also be carers. And I have a sense sometimes that some of them are also busybodies. And the ones that are real busybodies end up talking through spiritualist mediums, right? Because they just can't refrain. What's the busybody on the Archers called? What's her name? Is it Linda? Linda Snell, right. Can you imagine what Linda Snell would be like if she died and she's on the other side and somebody from Ambridge is dying? She'd be all over them, wouldn't she? So here's the interesting thing here. So people dying, there's a field of energy that's slightly polluted that they have to get through to get to the light. But on the other side, there's a lot of caring. And what does that caring look like? Well, in the same way that energy gets molded into shapes by how we think and feel, so if somebody thinks, I love Elvis, right, Linda Snell could go, for example, oh, my friend in Ambridge who's dying loves Elvis, right? You catch the thought. And because energy is plastic, moldable, it shifts into the shape that you want, that goes with the thinking. What can then happen is that Linda Snell takes on the form of Elvis. And as Eddie Grundy comes over, for those of you who don't listen to the Archers, he has pretensions of being a folk and rock star, right? As he comes over, Linda Snell dresses as Elvis and goes, come to me. Do not be distracted. My dad was a Harley Street psychiatrist who thought that what I was into was completely bonkers and very embarrassing. it was so embarrassing for him that when I did my 2-year spiritual retreat, he couldn't, cognitive dissonance, his brain was overwhelmed, he could not accept what was happening, and he told his friends I was on a tax dodge. Because it was more acceptable to him that I was on a tax dodge than that I was spiritual. But, nevertheless, I prepared an after-death scenario for him. So, he lived into his 80s, but he had colon cancer, and he was slowly moving out. So about a year before he died, sitting in meditation, I would talk to him and say, is it okay if I do some preparatory work for you? And he felt him going, yes. So I designed a scenario for him that would greet him the moment he came out of his body, so that he would be attracted immediately through the red blobs into clear light. And the scenario I dreamt up was that there was Sigmund Freud, cigar, whiskey, going, my dad's name was Philip, going, oh, Philip, I've just been waiting for someone to have a conversation with. Come, sit. Have a cigar, drink some whiskey, let's have a conversation. And during the conversation, Sigmund Freud would look at my dad and say, have you noticed anything different? And my father would go, oh, okay, right. And interestingly enough, 2 days after his death, I felt him come to me. I felt my dad come to me just going, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. You were right. I'm sorry. It was a beautiful moment for me. It was in my late 30s, and it was just what I needed. My mother, on the other hand, didn't like people anymore. 3 years in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, thought human beings were dodgy at the best. She liked animals, so we prepared a scenario for her of dancing animals. So I went from here for my dad. This is what greeted my dad when he died, for my mum. But what you have over and over again in the channeling that comes through people talking to folk on the other side is over and over again, you have these repeated stories of them being greeted by precisely whom they wanted to be greeted by. You know, being greeted by the family they loved the most, the animals they loved the most, the scenario they loved the most. They found themselves in the landscape they loved the most. And a lot of my interpretation of this comes from books by Jane Roberts, which you know, the Seth material, which was really excellent, that wrote about this in detail. And I buy it, that there are innumerable carers on the other side prepared to take on appropriate forms to welcome folk as they come across. And that then matches all the stories we get from different sources about what happens when you go to the other side, people who die and then come back, and all the channeling. At the same time, that also begins to explain in the mystery traditions, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Celtic Book of the Dead, in shamanic traditions, tribal traditions, animist traditions, there are group by group ideas about what it is will greet you when you die. You know, you will go to a mountain, you will go to the light, you will meet the great bear, you will meet the great spirit, you will find yourself in the temple of learning. And group by group, the priestesses and the priests have been sitting in meditation over centuries sometimes, developing the thought forms that are energetically created in a kind of plastic way into these real energetic forms, egregores they're sometimes called in Latin, of a gateway onto the other side. And it's plastic and it's movable, And one of the things I always encourage people to do in my workshops is if you're working to help someone cross over to the other side, day by day for months possibly, feel into, imagine, play with what it is that would greet them. And the mere fact that you're thinking it, feeling it, is enough for them on the other side to have a hint and be able to accept that as an impression. And it's very beautiful work to do. Don't only do it when you have a sense of permission from the person you're working with, but it's very beautiful and interesting work to do. And if I were a mainstream atheistic psychiatrist, which I could have been in an alternate reality, I would be saying, yeah, that may be factually rubbish, but psychotherapeutically, it's brilliant. Because it creates a metaphor and a passage and a completion that's very graceful and beautiful, and it's healthy and it does no harm. So well, we've still got the penguins up there, haven't we? So I recommend that as a practice. But the interesting question then emerges. All right, so look. There's us lot. We die. We go through the purgatory energy stuff that's not pleasant into the clear light. We're greeted by friends. What next? Esoteric traditions teach the same story. There's a generic story which the spiritualist churching and the channelings of the last 50 years kind of hint at, but don't quite get there. And the story is this, and it's emblemized very well in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. What's happening is that to the left-hand side, there's a scales. Can you see the scales? And there's a feather being weighed. And the feather being weighed is the history or the soul of the person who has died. And the god is looking at this feather on the scales and going, does it have any weight to it? What is the weight to it? And the story is that if it has any weight to it, that weight comes from, I'm going to put it in very kind of populist language, that weight comes from a life that was filled with error, or to put it in another language, had bad moods in it. Those bad moods manifesting as insecurity, greed, bullying, stuff. And if the feather weighs, the soul weighs more than the feather, what happens next? The soul has to go back to earth for another cycle of living. The sun god has been slain, scattered into 100 pieces, and is then thrown back to earth to rise again. It has to keep on being thrown to earth, rise again, thrown to earth, rise again, thrown to earth, rise again, until it's as light as a feather. So all the stories of life after death, this is very difficult for those people who are not comfortable with the notion of reincarnation and past lives, but comfortable with the idea of life after death. Because what you have to catch from this understanding is that the life after death does not make sense in terms of a learning cycle, a progression, unless there's some continuity and flow and rhythm to it, which is a rhythm that we happen to find in every single of the mystery traditions in one form or another. That you either learn your lessons and come out of it clean and pure, no karma, so to speak, and then you don't incarnate again. Inside that scenario of your soul being weighed against the feather is you've got over here, you've got another temple. So there are temples of learning. So one of the things that's taught, that crops up generically across all the different teachings is you die, you pass over into the clear light, you're welcomed. And then there's a period of reflection in which you then go, ooh, oh, that was what I was really like, was it? Okay, I'm beginning to get it. There's a period of learning in the learning temples. I get it. Okay, that's a lesson. That's another lesson. Oh, I spent the whole 50 years complaining. You know, that was me not understanding that I was carrying a history of insecurity that needed love and care, instead of which it turned into a lifetime of complaining about what everybody else was not doing for me. You know, oh, there's a lesson for me. It's because the trajectory in all these teachings is that you're coming out of confusion and ignorance and a bad mood into a state of, I'm in a good mood. I'm conscious. And being in a good mood and conscious, I'm naturally compassionate and loving. So there's a merging, compassion, love, conscious, good mood. And I actually think for someone like me, I don't know for someone like you, that little phrase, good mood, you're in a good mood or a bad mood, is kind of hits the nail on the head. Because can you imagine on the other side, in the light, looking back at 70, 80, 90, 100 years, whatever it is, it's going to be, oh, good mood, bad mood. And one of the most lovely things I heard or like about suggestions about how to die, for all of us, how to die. Those of us, any of us here who are looking at death, this is my advice. Do it in a good mood. Have the courage, because it will take some courage. Because, you know, at the end of life, those last months may be painful, they may be ignoble, they may have some humiliating aspects to them. We may not die gracefully. There may be a piece of DNA or generic inherited stuff that's happening in our bodies over which we have no control. Right? But I like the advice, go into your last months courageously and do it in a good mood and do it as your last gift to your friends and family. That's your last gift to your friends and family. Do it with love and consciousness. And that said, I know that some people will be in trauma and grief. The whole thing is poignant for human beings. We have these extraordinary polarities, don't we, between this magnificence of being able to do things bravely in a good mood and then experience grief and tragedy. That's why I often say that the greatest spiritual teacher is Shakespeare, because Shakespeare understands the full range of human experience, where spiritual teachers and psychologists are always trying to kind of dumb it down and classify it, but in actual fact it's huge and complex. This will be a picture, I think, that's probably familiar to many of you. Human being, aura, energy body. So the notion is, again, in all esoteric traditions, in one form or another, dense physical body, then emotions, I love you, I don't love you, hate, envy, and then thoughts, thinking, this is good, this is not good, you know, I'm thinking this, 2 + 2 = 4, aren't I clever, you know. And when we die, this is the way that the temples work. It's taught in the esoteric traditions, that bit by bit, each of these energy bodies melts away. So the first of the energy bodies that melts away is the physical one, that's dust to dust, ashes to ashes, earth to earth. And then the prana, the etheric, the chi, the ki that makes up the energy body of the physical body, that disintegrates. And then you've got all your emotions. You know, what emotions have you had for the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years, 20 years? What emotions are you carrying in your aura? And they will need to dissolve and go back into the flow of the cosmos. And then all your thoughts and thinking, they too will need to go back into the cosmos. And what's left then? What's left then? What's left then is that bit of us which we experience even now when we're incarnate in these bodies, which is able to occasionally stop and go, oh, I'm watching. I'm compassionate, I'm engaged, I'm in a good mood, and I'm observant. I'm just consciousness. I'm just consciousness watching. And there's this, in my case, there's this William creature doing his blah blah in front of all these people, you know, and the William creature is looking at people's body language and wondering if people like me or don't like me and doing all his emotional stuff. And his mind is tickety-booing away on the talk. And at the same time, there's consciousness there. And the same with you. There's consciousness in each of us. There's a bit of us, you know, there's a kind of snobbery in some forms of spirituality where they say, oh, to be the witnessing consciousness is kind of very complex and difficult. And I don't think it is. I think everybody has it from time to time. We just pause and we're just looking at everything in a good mood, just watchful. We know it's a mystery, and we know we don't have all the answers, you know, but there's a kind of benevolence to it. That's the essence of our soul. So the body gives way, the emotions give way, the mind gives way, and there's consciousness left. And there are maps. Do you know these maps at all? There are maps of these consciousness. So the bottom level is physical, then to emotional, then to mental. So in a sense, that soul's journey is up, while this stuff down the bottom just kind of gives way and disappears. And I try to emblemise it here. Here's one body that floats off. It's the emotional body, and then you've got all your thoughts, and then they float off. And then there's you at the center. Just consciousness. Just consciousness. Dun, 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 dun. What happens next? What does consciousness do now? Well, the story is, of course, that consciousness incarnates again. Because that's part of a rhythm, in the same way that the sun moves and the moon moves and the galaxies move and the universe throbs in and out and the black holes appear and disappear. Everything is in rhythm, everything is in cycles, everything manifests, demanifests. Why should the soul be any different? So the story is that in terms of our relationship with planet Earth, the soul has no choice except to magnetically, it's attracted back in. It's attracted back into the nearest... I just couldn't help myself. It's the nearest fucked up family that matches your own vibe. You know, where the lessons are. You will get attracted back into where the lessons of that family match your own shit. Right? You know, so, you know, your parents represent a caricature of your own problems, usually, right? And your own genius. And your own flair. But, you know, it's a magnetic attraction. When Caroline Miss and others talk about a contract and like these souls on the other side studying what to do next, like, I don't know, like Dominic Cummings in Number 10, right? Studying what to do next. Oh, I'm now going to do this. Anyway, soul doesn't make a decision like that. What happens is it has a harmonic. It's more Pythagorean. It's more musical. The soul has the harmonics of its history, and it will go to wherever a couple are making love that have similar harmonics, you know? Meow. And there ain't any perfect parents, and there ain't hardly any perfect souls, you know. Hence us. But this is, I'm onto the last phase of this presentation. It goes, why is this all happening anyway? Why is this all happening anyway? And again, the esoteric traditions have a similar story. So I am now, in 5 minutes, going to give you the meaning of life. Yeah, thank you very much. And if I get it right, please make your checks out. Creation, Big Bang, William Blake's creation, Big Bang. Extraordinary cosmos. Extraordinary cosmos. Oh, look how beautiful Earth is, right? All that is absolutely gorgeous. All that is absolutely gorgeous. But everything runs in cycles. Everything runs in rhythms. So why on earth should that happen just once? So the story goes that it's not just once, there's also a second time with a different vibe. That's Rurik's Mother of the World. Do you know? Don't you know that painting? Right? So we've gone from a kind of masculine Blakean, right, which creates a beautiful cosmos, beautiful planet, beautiful Earth, beautiful nature, beautiful proportions, beautiful harmonics, and then there's another breath. But the second breath has a different vibe. The second breath has a different vibe, and the vibe of the second breath is not order and precision and beauty and pattern and proportion. This second breath has a vibe which we call love, wisdom, love, compassion, something like that. And I don't mean it as something sentimental. I mean it as a very high vibration that is so soft that when you go into it, it's more powerful than a tsunami or a hurricane, and everything melts and consciousness expands. It's extraordinary, and it's why in all the major traditions, spiritual and religious traditions, when people expand their consciousnesses, they also go into bliss. They don't go into being clever. You know? When people from the different traditions, men and women, expand their consciousnesses fully, they go to paradise. They don't go to a laboratory. They go into ecstasy, they go to bliss, they go to love. And it's a vibe, and it's not sentimental, and it's not stupid. It's very wise and interesting and engaging. So there's a second breath, and the second breath breathes out the souls that have to incarnate. And the souls are carrying, these souls are carrying a different vibe. Let's call it a vibe of love. What we've got on planet Earth is we've got lots of beauty and harmonics and proportion. I remember my friend Marko Pogacnik, a sculptor, mystical, spiritual sculptor, paintings, saying to his groups once, "Do you not see how beautifully Gaia prepared herself for our souls? Do you not see what beautiful clothing was made available for us in order to incarnate and have our souls journey?" So the story is that the soul incarnates into this beauty to expand the beauty's awareness into something that's more fully conscious, more fully loving, more fully wise. It's a very, very beautiful and inspiring story. And the problem is that the end result is us. And each of us in this room has that very precise experience of being both the solid form and the cosmic consciousness, and the two of them trying to marry, trying to integrate. Can we just take a minute's quiet together? Just let that settle. Thank you. So let's have a conversation. We've got a roaming mic for some Q&A and conversation. Yeah, great.
But now he's saying you need to get out of this construct, and the only way to get out of it is every day to say, I want to go home to the source. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I want to go home. So you have to say it every morning, I want to go home to the source, rather than be trapped. And he said you will then find a way through this almost, your red blobby thing, like a net, to get out. I'd just like to know your view on this, because I'm thoroughly confused, because having been part of what you're saying all my life, now I've heard this and I'm thinking, am I on the wrong road?
Well, I think it's 100% great that having had one view all your life, you've been wobbled by another view. What I think the next step is that your overarching witnessing consciousness goes, oh, isn't that interesting? A lifetime of that, then this, what's the lesson coming from this teaching? Isn't it interesting that it wobbles me? Oh, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
And inside your own wisdom, you'll discern. You'll discern how it works for you, because it might be that his particular teaching is a nudge for you in terms of an attitude, to shift your attitude.
I see. Thank you.
Or it might be a nudge that, get shocked a bit, because that will help your consciousness wake up.
All right.
I don't think it really matters whether the actual teaching itself is accurate or not accurate. I think what's important for any teaching is whether it enables each one of us to develop more consciousness, more love, more presence, more awareness. And in that context, almost every spiritual teaching is useful in its own way.
Thank you.
Is that helpful?
Yes, it is.
Because that could sound terribly wishy-washy.
No, I'm taking that on board. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much. We have a lady over there. Sheila will come to you.
Hi. I might have a kind of similar question, in the sense that I want to ask you: are you aware of the Monroe Institute and the Robert Monroe books?
Yeah.
So you may also be aware that they say, and they exist for 35 years or more, that it's not that simple to go into the light, and that you have to be very careful, and that you have to ask who you see if they are true, if they are really themselves, and that is the way to go out of this cycle of reincarnation. What's your opinion about that?
My experience is that 99.999% of people very easily move into the light because the planet and its little field of psychic pollution is very tiny compared to the vastness of the cosmos. So there's a natural attraction out into the cosmos that's very strong. Because the amount of those of us who do conscious soul rescuing, there's not a lot of it happening given that there are 8 billion people on the planet. So I find the idea of suggesting that it's more difficult than I experience it to be kind of echoing a little bit with Catholic hints about purgatory and some of the Tibetan Buddhist stuff about the nastier aspects of the Bardo state, which would agree exactly with what you just said. But it's not my experience. And but I find it very interesting to have a discussion about it.
Any other questions? I thought we had another hand here a minute ago. Oh, there's a lady there, Sheila.
Hi, William. You took 5 minutes to explain why this is all happening. And I didn't quite get an answer, I think. I still don't understand. You talk about a first breath, a second breath. That's all facts, that's happenings. I don't see the cause behind it.
You are so right. It's a mystery. What that particular explanation of one breath following another breath, or a pulse within a pulse, is the nearest that esoteric traditions get to explaining the friction and the difficult process of incarnation for the human soul in the complexity of us, of our creatures. And if we were spending the evening together and we were in armchairs and my feet were up, I'd be saying, yes, ultimately that is a mystery. But that story of the pulsing and the two breaths tends to be a useful pointer as to what might be happening.
Yeah, again, that's what is happening, but why? I mean, is there a cause behind it?
I understand that, but the tangible experience that people who consciously move along the spiritual path is that inside the complexity of a sophisticated ape with a highly complex nervous system and sophisticated brain and endocrine system, there's this consciousness within it that has an instinct towards becoming more awake, more alert, more loving, more present. And that's a generic experience for people doing spiritual development, regardless of the path they're on. And you've asked the perfect question, haven't you? And that's an existential here and now experience for folk practicing spiritual development. And then you ask why. And I'm not sure, except that it feels better to become more loving, more conscious, more present. That somehow or other is congruent with highest ethics. It has a nobility about it, and an idealism and a utopianism about it that sings to the human heart.
I agree on that. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? We do, over here. Hold on.
Thank you very much for your talk. I kind of like what you said about sort of being in a good mood. Yeah, I mean, I've sort of had the opportunity to interview a great number of people in this field because I've made a few films about it.
Can you hear what he's saying, folks?
Can I say? I'll say it again. Is that better? So I was just saying I've had an opportunity to to interview quite a large number of people in this field because I've made a couple of documentaries about it, and especially about out-of-body experience and near-death experience. And one of the things they continuously say is that when they're out of the body in the afterlife realms, there's a mixture between a consensus, a sort of constructed reality, and then a reality they create with their own minds. Essentially, they're in a world of the mind stuff. And so in a sense, they're consciously creating their own realities. Now, you alluded to the idea that sort of if somebody believes in Jesus Christ, they kind of want to end up in that reality. We kind of end up in the realities that we create. And we do this anyway in our day-to-day lives. If I'm in a bad mood, I'm creating my terrible reality for myself, and so everything looks a bit bleak. So I sort of always see the afterlife realm as an extension of that, so that there's no escaping the consequences of your own thoughts and feelings, and they will manifest themselves writ large in the afterlife. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. But the only thing I would add to it is here and now in this 3D solid world, we are in awful need of grace, of waves of grace that help lubricate that process. And the experience of most of us who are exploring altered states of consciousness is that if we can slip into that good mood and be present to the stuff we're constructing, and what I mean by grace is, a helpful vibration, energy, resonance that helps us shift our wounds and neuroses and stuckedness without having to pay for it. It just moves more easily, it opens up. And I think that's much easier when we're dead.
So one more point. When I was interviewing, have you heard of the skull experiment?
The what?
Skull, S-C-O-L-E. It was an experiment done by a series of mediums in the 90s. And it was hugely successful. It occurred over about 5 years, and they were able to sort of have almost continuous communication with the other side via mediums, and a lot of amazing evidence. And when I interviewed some of the mediums there, because they were basically chatting away, like a bit like you and I, just chatting away to the other side, what they said was that reincarnation occurs, but it wasn't mandatory, it wasn't obligatory. So there was an opportunity for souls, if they couldn't face coming back to the physical realm, which is pretty, demanding, they could have the opportunity to develop in the non-physical world. They could actually evolve that way. Although the problem was, the caveat was that it was a much slower process. Being in the physical realm is the fastest way of evolving. Mm-hmm. What's your view on that?
There are many houses. There are other lovely stories about people incarnating as birds to make it slightly easier. I don't know. It will be interesting for me to study further when I'm dead.
Thank you very much.
Well, we've got the person next would like to say something.
What's your opinion on possible interdimensional entities and their consciousness, or their possible consciousness?
I didn't hear the question properly. Could you do it more slowly?
Yeah. What's your opinion on possible interdimensional entities and their consciousness.
Entities. Now, can I talk about entities and keep the vibe up? That's the challenge for me this precise second, having taken us down a particular journey for the last hour. Yes, there are entities. Some of the entities are developed via humanity's cruelty, and some of the entities come in from other dimensions. And my experience of those entities, without exception, is that I'm going to avoid the question actually and take it in another direction, but I'm doing it because I don't want to take the evening off in another direction. But my experience of all those things is that the therapist, priestess, magician can always deal with them successfully if that person is aligned with love and consciousness. Because those entities, whatever their source, find the vibration of love and wisdom difficult to handle. And that's me kind of sliding out.
That will do. Any other questions? Yes. Hold on.
Andy?
It's a race. All right, we'll do this lady first, and then we'll come to you in one moment. All right. Go ahead.
Good evening, William. Good to see you again. Do you remember the books Conversations with God?
Mm-hmm.
Written about 25 years ago, I think. When I read, he says that when you die, your soul leaves your body and it's the most wonderful experience that you can have. And since I've read that, my life changed. So I don't want to go yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I thought that was great, very positive. What do you think of those books?
Well, I love what you just said. Say it again for everybody.
Oh, when your soul leaves your body, the Conversations with God, the book said, it's the most wonderful experience that you ever have. When your soul comes into your body, it's much more difficult, and sometimes you cry as a baby. But when your soul leaves your body, it's wonderful, and we must all look forward to it.
Great.
Fair enough. Next.
Hi, thanks for your talk. What is your feeling of the passage of time when you die? Like linear time not existing anymore, and stuff like that.
Thank you.
I was in the Whole Food store 10 years ago, and Serena Roney Dougal, everybody knows Serena Roney Dougal, she's given talks here, and what was the book she called, Where Magic and Science Meet? Is that where it was called, right? And Serena in the room? No. She'd just come back from the Himalayas, where one of the northern Indian universities had paid her to do some research on psychic monks in remote Himalayan monasteries. And so these kind of conversations happen in the Whole Foods store in the high street here, right? So I said, wow, that's interesting, right? And the conversation went to, what did those monks think about reincarnation? Did they believe in reincarnation? Yes, they all did. Tick to that one, right? Next question, what did they all think about time? You know, the time dimension. And they said, well, time is a dimension that we transcend in consciousness. And I said, did you then ask them the question? And she said, yes. Of course, the question then is, right? if time is a dimension you transcend in consciousness, what is happening in reincarnation? And at that point, she said, all they did was kind of, their eyes started to spin round in their sockets and roll. So your question about timing is one of those questions. In linear time, my sense is there's a pause of between 3 and several hundred years. That said, though, there do appear to be swarms of souls that come in together, and there are large gaps of time before they all come in together. But I'm not a student of that particular aspect of it. What do you think? Yeah.
Which is really hard to get your head around.
Well, then you've got the Tibetan monks with their eyes spinning in their head. Right?
Yeah, it's me.
Because as human beings, we're both located in 3 dimensions and in time, but our consciousnesses can transcend it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, no, any more like that. I thought I'd dealt with the meaning of life.
I wonder if you could talk more about the bad mood ghost.
Ghost?
Yeah, you talked about the bad mood ghost. Is that ghost stuck to the planet?
My experience of ghosts is they're few and far between. There are... Have I just seen Leo? Is that Leo in front of you? Yes. Yeah, fine, okay. It's my old friend. Oh, I hadn't seen you because the light's right in my eyes, right? My experience of ghosts is this. 1, places and atmospheres absorb vibrations. The absorption of those vibrations can be so intense that little spirit beings, elemental beings, absorb those vibrations and start to act out as if, and give the appearance and create phenomena, and they're not actually ghosts. That's number 1. Number 2, ghosts are actually far and few between, and they are human beings who've died in an awful, awful bad mood for one reason or another. Maybe because they're on the streets drinking meth and have completely lost the plot. So when they come out of their bodies at death, it doesn't feel different. They're just out of their bodies at death, wandering around in a bad mood. And if they're in a really bad mood, they might go, the energy can shift something, can move something, but that's very rare. But I think most of the phenomena that people talk about as ghosts, in actual fact, is bad atmospheres of little elemental beings playing with it. That's me very quickly. And what will happen with those bad moods is people like me or you who are healers will go in, absorb some of the bad mood, transmute it into something more benevolent, bless it, and move it on. Quickly. That was me very quickly addressing that.
One more question, perhaps? Oh, this lady here, I think. We're racing again. Here we go.
Thank you. Is it just... Is it gone? Could I ask you, please, if you could just explain a couple of statements that you made earlier? One of them was that one of them... Sorry.
I can't hear you, though.
Oh, into the top, sorry.
Okay.
You made a remark that people must die must die in a happy mood.
Yeah.
How do you explain what happens to somebody who dies of a heart attack instantly?
Yeah. I hope I didn't use the word must. It was a kind of, for those of us who move consciously towards death, it was a piece of counsel and nudging that we do it in a good mood and bravely. But for someone who dies in their sleep or has a heart attack, then there's a period they're out of their body and moving across. What usually happens, though, is because there are millions of carers here and on the other side, that as someone moves towards death, in their constellation of acquaintances, there will be awareness that they're moving towards death. And it's very, very rare that someone will die where there's nothing there on the other side to greet them.
But they can't prepare for it.
Well, the individual who's has an unexpected heart attack. No, not in the same way that I'm hoping we can. On the other hand, and I imagine I'm not alone in this room, I've been preparing for death since my 20s. Just knowing that at a certain point it will naturally happen and I want to be conscious in it. That leaves me much freer to live my life in a way that's more balanced.
Could I also just ask you about your statement that you created a scenario for somebody else? Isn't that going against somebody else's free will?
Yes, I was quite careful, and I will repeat it now with your nudge. And the reason I've got my hands like this is so I can actually see your face with the light straight in my face. Don't do that kind of work unless you have a meditative practice, and inside the meditative practice, you come into intuitive empathy with that person and go, is it okay for me to do this? And people get very, very clear signals as to whether or not that's acceptable, because I agree with you, otherwise it's intrusive. I agree. Thank you for raising it again.
Thank you.
We have to draw to a close. William, would you like to share some final thoughts for us?
Let's just take 30 seconds quiet together, just to... Thank you. I want to express some gratitude to you, because this is the first time I've ever tried to present the whole stream of how I experience it, and you have been a wonderful, receptive, intelligent, empathic, sympathetic group to do this with, and I'm sure each one of you in your own way would help me expand it further, so I'm grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you, William.